Okay, I know this is going to interrupt the flow because there's several points. We can always go back to them, but we try and give priority to questions because it's democracy. They're being sent in. Yes, no, people are watching. This one is from Ken in London, which says, angry at the US position. We haven't really gone into this tonight, but there's been a lot of... I mean, all the focus of the criticism has been at the US, really, plus Canada, Japan, and the others. So can I ask you, Mark Lynas, journalist, author, former pie thrower, is it time to threaten the US with trade sanctions? This is Ken's question.
I think the role of the US here is quite interesting because everybody's waiting for them to go away, right? There are sort of, you know, there was the analogy is of the last person left at a wedding when everyone else has gone home, sort of thing. I mean, they are holding up negotiations without really having a mandate because they are the last government left on the planet, basically, which doesn't want to see action on climate change. I mean, all right, they've had Canada and Japan as well, but Canada and Japan only take the position they do because they're being given this great political cover by the US. Once the US government changes, then Canada and Japan will have to fall into line too. So really, the linchpin of all of this is the change of government, which is going to happen in the US in, 13 months from now. So it would probably be better if you could stop the clock here and resume when Bush is out of the White House, because nothing can happen while Bush is still there blocking progress. But from my perspective, they should be pushing at an open door because a lot of the corporations have changed. It used to be the international business lobby which blocked all of this, and by lobbying all of the politicians. That's shifted. I mean, not completely, but they've been putting adverts in major newspapers saying, please give us targets so that we have a framework that we can build our investment decisions on. I mean, they're crying out for some kind of certainty about what's going to happen in the future. And everybody knows that the tectonic plates have shifted on climate change and that it's only a matter of time before we have a global deal. But getting that global deal is absolutely essential because you can't do this from the bottom up. You've got to get the economics right. You've got to have a price on carbon so that all of the business decisions make sense wherever they're taken in the world. And that's why what happens here may seem rather complex and rather arcane, but actually it's absolutely crucial that this comes to a successful conclusion.
Okay, that's why we're here, because it's important. Can I follow up with another question from David in the USA? Perhaps I could ask you, Martin Hiller of WWF. If the feeling is that the USA is not sincere in these negotiations, which there seems to be a consensus on around this table, wouldn't it be better to basically ignore them and make an agreement anyway, with a spot reserved for them in the future? This was rather Al Gore's point yesterday, I think.
Well, David, I think they're unfortunately very sincere, the US, and it's the US government here, the US delegation here. They're sincerely set to destroy these talks here and to scupper them as much as they can. That's what they are about. So, yes, I think it would be better to do these negotiations without the White House and its minions here in the negotiations. But that's obviously not an option. So we somehow need to get around them. Now, if the other countries had a little bit of courage, and some of the countries do, then they could pick that up and could throw it back at the US delegation here and would get their way, because the US is only one country, and one thing in the US is quite good. The US and Tuvalu, the little tiny Pacific state, both have two people in there who can speak, and they have the same right to raise their voice in the UN Assembly. So, you know, courageous countries that are coming forward and taking leadership, can actually change the balance in there. And we're sitting here and we're looking at a whole night where the negotiations are going to go on now, and we're waiting for those countries to come forward and say, cut the crap, sorry my language. Go for the real thing. We are in an emergency situation and we need to get decisions here. The world can really not afford to not bring this to at least a reasonable successful conclusion.
But what I'm not clear about, is how at this conference can we, as you say, cut the crap? I mean, the US is not going to change. Presumably the delegation has got its instructions from Washington. They may give and take a little here and there, but if they're not going to change, what are the rest of the delegates going to do? Is that an option? Tony Juniper.
I think one of the really important things to bear in mind at this conference compared to some others, and I've been coming to these for more than 15 years, and before Rio I've been following this process, And I think one of the most dramatic changes in the circumstances of these talks in recent times has been the dramatic move in public opinion in the United States. And Mark mentioned the US corporations as well. There used to be a real bloc. There's now a bunch of them out there calling for targets and timetables agreed internationally. They want trading schemes in the US. They want regulatory systems put in place to make them all go low carbon so they can be certain about the market, so their competitors are doing the same thing, and everybody can go green in an orderly way. They can make money, they can create jobs, they can generate wealth, but they can do it with some certainty. They're saying that now. You've got city mayors, you've got state leaders like Arnold Schwarzenegger putting out legislation calling for big cuts, mandating big cuts in greenhouse gas emissions. You've got the US scientific community. We did a piece of work the other day discovering, I think we knew it already, but we just rechecked it, that most of the scientists in the IPCC are actually American. Most of the biggest number of single nationality is the US. You've got all those people who are sounding the alarm inside the United States, and the public are starting to pick up now a different vibe. They're getting better media coverage in the USA. There's more access to international media through the internet and global broadcasting channels. So the view is moving, even though there have been these attempts by the White House and a few of their old fossilized backers like ExxonMobil trying to stop this moving. Now, that changes things here, because before the United States could block the talks and they could go back home and say, look, we stopped a really bad deal because we know Kyoto is going to cost us a fortune and global warming's not proven. Now, people in the US don't believe that. They think it won't cost a fortune, they can see benefits, and they know that the science is true. And so Bush here had to play a different game to before. They can't just block up front. They can do tactical stuff behind the scenes, which is what they've been doing, but they've been smiling sweetly in public, saying, we want to cooperate, we want a deal, because they know that the domestic audience has changed. Now, what's happened here in the last couple of days, because of the work that some of the green groups have been doing, with Al Gore turning up, and then some of the European governments, Bush has been exposed back home. And I do think in the next few hours this is going to be quite a crucial dynamic, because if he thinks that this is going to be something that's going to be pinned on him, it's going to mean that a Republican president after him is not going to be very likely. So if he wants to have some political momentum and his ideas to be carried forward in any form at all, this is a real liability for him now. So I'm going to sit here and I'm going to say to people in the United States that if you can now write an email, please, to the White House or put something on a blog, tell the president that this is not acceptable, and even in these last few hours maybe we can make a difference, because that now counts in the US like it never did before.
Okay, that's... There you go. People are always asking what they can do. There's one specific thing you can do. There's Martin Hiller.
Go to your local newspaper. Go to your local radio station. Don't send anything to the White House because it's lost there. Yeah? But send it to blogs. Blogs is a great idea. Yeah? Just get this truth out, because the Bush administration here is still trying to spin that the developing countries were the ones guilty of fail if these talks here fail. And that's an enormous lie. That's an enormous lie, because all those countries, with China included, came here with a really open mind, and they want to move that because they feel the heat. They know the climate change is going to hit them really hard. They want to move out of it. They feel this crisis coming already. It's the Bush administration who is preventing us from progressing here.
Okay, thanks, Martin Hiller. Mark, Lynas, can I ask you, there's another question here from Anna in London. What is the response of new economies such as India and China? Can we keep them on board if the US is too difficult? This is something that often comes up, as you know. People say, well, what can I do? It's all useless because China and India are out there and they're not cutting emissions.
I think Tony mentioned this morning, actually, in the press conference that you probably just transmitted, which is that this has become the stock response, hasn't it? China is building 2 power stations a week, therefore I don't need to give up driving my car or whatever it happens to be. So it's a sort of knee-jerk response. But it does have some basis in obvious psychological reality, that what's the point of my acting if somebody else is going to undermine it by what they're doing? So, which brings us back to the reason that we have to have a global agreement, because otherwise you don't have any certainty that everybody's behaving. And once everybody's doing it, you have a sort of social tipping point, then it becomes in everyone's interest. I mean, by analogy, I pay income tax, not voluntarily, but because I know everybody else in the country is also paying income tax. It's quite a lot of my money. I wouldn't do it just for fun, you know. But that kind of psychology is very important here. We need to know that everyone's acting. But the developing countries, China and India in particular, still insist, quite legitimately, that they shouldn't take on mandatory cuts in terms of their own emissions, because that's going to hold back their own development path. But they are saying that they want clean development, and they want to avoid making the same mistakes that the rich countries made in terms of a fossil-fueled development path. So they're making all the right noises, and I think if the US wasn't being obstructive, you would be seeing some quite interesting moves here in terms of what the big developing countries are doing, because as Martin said, they're feeling the heat, they're seeing the floods, they're seeing the droughts, they're seeing the crop losses in their own country, and they know that we're all in this boat together.